Hello and welcome back. My name is Jeremiah Sanchez, author of Parachute Minds, Leap of Fate, and soon to be released Parachute Minds, Light Switch. I've been watching a lot of TV lately because there's a lot of good stuff out there. Now, when it comes to television, what captures me the most is the writing. I know. Shocker. I do love my popcorn, special effects, explosion-ridden movies that are just pumped out every single year, and I devour those things with insatiable gluttony. However, if I'm going to recommend a show or a movie or a book or anything of any kind of creative medium, it's going to be based on the writing. Right now, Netflix is killing it, partially because of their worldwide phenomenon juggernaut, Squid Game, which everyone's heard of, and partially because of this other show that I don't believe is getting the credit that it truly deserves, Midnight Mass. Now, first and foremost, this video will remain completely spoiler-free. I know that most of you have probably already seen one, if not both of these shows, but for the few of you that watch this video that have not seen one or the other, I will not spoil any of the major twists and turns, which I promise you both of these shows are chock full of. Rather, this video is going to focus on three components that make these two shows, at least for me, so just gripping and deserving of praise. Both Midnight Mass and Squid Game require you to pay close attention to all of the subtle intricacies and nuances of every single episode that do inevitably build to these incredible finales. This day and age, we are bombarded by just show after show after show, usually entertaining but forgettable, that require very little attention to be paid for you to understand what's going to happen next. You could just hop in halfway through a season, put together the obvious plot points that led to where you're at, and probably accurately predict where it's going. Even if you're having fun, you don't have to think too hard. Whereas these two shows require you to pay full attention. Squid Game and Midnight Mass have provided master classes in screenwriting, and I really hope that Hollywood is paying attention, because that would mean that in the future we'd get more shows and movies that would aim for the same incredible ideals. They demonstrate three captivating and compelling components that I strive for with myself with my own books, and they are done so well in these shows that I'm actually taking the time to make a recommendation video, which I don't normally do. So, buckle up and I'll explain all three to you. The first two are vitally important, but it's the third one that is my personal favorite. So, stick to the end and I'll explain what makes, for me, a story, a show, a movie, regardless of medium, compelling and captivating. The first component, which is arguably the most important, is that every book, story, show, movie, any kind of storytelling has to balance two primary components. One, plot. Two, characters. Between those two, they have to find a way to accomplish the plot while expressing the characters, and that's oftentimes a very difficult balance for writers to succeed at making both gritty, gripping, and powerful. It's very easy to get lost in the plot and the story and the grandiose universe you're creating and just use characters as a vehicle to get from point A to point B. It's also lazy, and unfortunately I feel like these days, more often than not, shows and movies are relying too heavily on plot and disregarding their characters. And while there are many modern examples of this, I think one of the ones that rings the truest and is the most deeply wrenching knife in the hearts to so many of us that share this together is Game of Thrones. The first few seasons, which were obviously much closer to the books, hence better writing, they were slow, they were gripping, they were visceral, they were raw, and every single decision that every character made, from the entire spectrum of those that we loved all the way to those that we hated, they felt real, they felt genuine. When a character did something that you loved, it felt like something that they would do based off of the character that was created. If they did something that was reprehensible and vile and just boiled your blood, it felt believable, because once again, it was true to the character. One of the examples I want to give where the writers really leaned too heavily on the plot and disregarded the character development is Jaime and Cersei. So, from the very beginning of the show, and through many seasons, over the course of many years, we sat and watched that vile, self-entitled, pretentious, murderous, incestuous piece of shit, Jamie, to go through this entire just painful story arc where he just finds himself trapped in this world that we don't understand yet. All we see is this evil character, but he has this painful backstory that explains why he is the way he is that we don't find out till many seasons down the road. At first, all we see is this evil man, and we go on this journey over and over and over again. We are forced to experience every decision he makes, every single evil thing that he does, everyone that he hurts, every single person that he manipulates. We go on this journey until he, spoiler, loses a hand and then has to go in this entire redemptive arc. And it's compelling because it's real. Every step is difficult and it demands so much of him. And we were all so invested, and by the end of it, at least for myself, I cared about him. I genuinely cared about the person that he was becoming and all of the decisions he was making to better himself. And then the writers changed everything that they had built, everything that had been developed within Jamie, and just ignored the character development because they wanted to have this gross, damaged Romeo and Juliet finish, and they had him discard all of his developments, everything that had changed, and just revert back to season 1 Jamie, go meet up with his sister, and die in the catacombs holding each other. It was aiming for poetry, and it just came out flat and emotionally disconnected. And additionally, seriously, in the battle, I'm so disconnected from that show. I forget the names of all the episodes and battles I once had memorized by heart. But in the earlier seasons, I think it was season 2, there was the siege being waged where Cersei was inside drinking wine, getting drunk, and just holding a middle finger to anyone that was coming to kill her. She was going to face death with just callous disdain, and that was so true to her character. And then at the very end, in the arms of Jamie, she's crying and screaming about how scared she is, and that's just not who she was. These were characters that had been developed so thoroughly, and then their character development and their character arcs had just been ripped away to get from point A to point B. And it just felt so unnatural. So, now I'll stop tirading about the things I hate and focus on something that I love. Squid Game and Midnight Mass. Let's go. Both of these shows have fully realized, fleshed out, genuine, flawed, real characters. That made me root for the protagonists because they were real. They were real people. And their decisions felt like decisions those characters would truly make. They didn't feel forced. They felt organic. They were painfully organic. When they did something that was wrong, it felt like someone that you cared about was betraying you, but in a way that was real. If they did something right, you were rooting for them because they were doing something that really took character development to reach, and you could see the sacrifices being made to get there. Right characters who make decisions based off of who they are. Period. That's all it takes. If you write a genuine character, good or bad, that makes decisions based off of the character you have designed them to be, and it feels real, then no matter what the journey is, no matter what the plot is, if a reader, if a viewer is invested in that character, they will go on any journey with them, to any extent. They will go to the ends of the earth with that character, simply because they care about them. That is so much more important than plot. In Squid Game specifically, every decision, every terrifying game, every sudden and shocking death, every twist and turn, I was invested. I cared. No matter how simple or extreme the situation was, and that show was chock full of every level, I cared because the characters were real. I was emotionally charged and invested because I could relate to them. No matter what the characters were or what life experiences they had, they were believable. And when they're believable, there's at least one layer in every character that, to whatever extent, feels like a reflection of yourself. The main character, for example, starts off just defined by his greed and his addiction and his desperation in so many different ways that he's just drowning in debt, leading him to burn every single bridge around him, even though you can tell that deep down he genuinely wants to get better, but he doesn't know how. And because of that, he manipulates everyone around him. He betrays trust. He just hurts those that he does care about. And you can see that he cares about them. But he can't help spiraling because of who he is. Hence, the plot. As soon as he's invited to partake in the Squid Game, which, once again, no spoilers, that's where his character is challenged, and he has to overcome these seemingly and oftentimes truly insurmountable odds just to have a chance at survival, let alone being able to repair the relationships that he has just wreaked havoc on. In Midnight Mass, the opening scene alone, it sets a tone that it was peculiar because it was moving, it was powerful, it was gripping, it was real. You've heard of these stories happening, but I didn't understand how it tied to the overall plot of the show, and it doesn't for quite a while. It doesn't pay off until later in the season, but when it does, it's harrowing. It is absolutely harrowing, and it demonstrates this profound character growth in the primary protagonist that it left me speechless when I finally understood what was taking place. The primary protagonist's story, his life-altering moment, and how it shapes his decisions through this bizarre and twisting tale, it's masterfully done. The writing in Midnight Mass left me breathless by the end of it. And even though the show is packed with a very powerful plot and crazy happenings, crazy circumstances that evolve in unique and unsuspecting ways, this dialogue-heavy show could have been nothing but the conversations between the characters, and I still would have been just as invested, and I still would be recommending this to you. The characters' interactions are so captivating and mesmerizing just because of what they're discussing and how well it's written for them to be discussing it. It's incredible. Please go watch Midnight Mass. And all that being said about the characters over the plot, both of these shows, both Squid Game and Midnight Mass, they both have incredible plots. They still have really unique and defining plots that are worth watching. It's just that they did such a good job prioritizing their characters above their plot that you care more about what's happening in the plot. Very simple, but so often that mark is missed. Aim for the characters above the plot. But both these shows are great all the way across. Anyways, high praise for both of those details, for both of those shows. Moving on to the second component. Villains. Villains. Villains determine the stakes. For example, it's where DC typically shines and where Marvel sometimes hits their mark. As much as I appreciate Christopher Nolan's take on Batman himself, it was Heath Ledger's portrayal as the Joker that made The Dark Knight such a timeless masterpiece. And with Marvel, their primary tentpole is Infinity War, and that's because of the expertly written villainy of Thanos. A good villain is relatable, oftentimes charismatic, and capable of swaying us nearly to joining their cause, oftentimes convincing us to join their cause until we realize the measures they're willing to go to. If that old saying is true, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, then a good villain should be a Colorado construction worker. If a villain is written generic, cliche, devoid of personality beyond take over the earth, destroy the world, then there's just no connection, there's no relatability, and we don't invest our emotions into the damage they could cause. We simply just sit back and go, well, I wonder how the good guy's gonna kill them. And that's not compelling. To handle this, the screenwriters of both Squid Game and Midnight Mass did something unexpected and brilliant. Both shows have a big bad, they have a primary antagonist, and they do a good job as the big bad. But more importantly than that, both shows took likable, or at least tolerable characters and devolved them through extreme circumstance, exposing a darker, sinister layer, and spiraled them down until they became these secondary evils, these secondary bad guys. And those villains I found far more compelling because their stories, you follow their entire journey from either good or at least unassuming into this evil that I can't even talk. I hated them so much more than the big bads because the big bads are expected to be bad. They start off the show as the evil that has to be overcome. But these secondary characters that became the villains by the end, they got under my skin. They're the ones that had me wanting to tear through my screen and just end them and dispose of them myself. And for that, I have to applaud the writers and the actors who portrayed them, because that's real to me. That made me feel invested, because I watched them descend from who they were, becoming someone that caused the most damage, someone that created the most opportunity for madness and chaos and hatred and manipulation. And it's the perversion of good and slow burn into evil is so much more captivating and engrossing, and had me on the edge of my seat. So, second component, villains. If your villain is good, then I care about the stakes presented to your protagonist. And now, finally, onto the third component, and my personal favorite. This one may not be as important and vital as characters over plot, but for me, it's what brings me back to watch the same show, watch the same movie, or read the same book a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and that is presenting the show, or presenting the story, as a question rather than an answer. Let me explain. If a book, story, show, movie, or any kind of storytelling medium presents its adventure as answers, as outright ends to discussions or discoveries, they're probably still enjoyable, probably still worth a watch, and optionally multiple watches. But the difference is that you know what's coming, you know what's going to happen, and because of that, it's kind of a dead discussion. It's just an observation. Most stories are simply that. They tell you the adventure, they tell you the story, and upon second viewing and any multiple viewing after that, you know what's going to happen, you know the twists, you know the answers. And that's not bad. But when a story does that rare thing where afterwards you are just left wondering, you're left thinking about it, you're left coming to your own conclusions, trying to find your own personal answers to the questions that were asked within it, it's a living thing. Because it's different per viewer. It'll be different for you upon different viewings as you grow. And it'll be different per conversation you have about those big philosophical questions long after. In short, they force you to parachute your mind. Huh? I thought that was the perfect placing for a little shameless plug. Helps you parachute your mind. And by that definition, in my mind, that's what makes a story a living thing, because it grows and it evolves, it adapts and it changes. So, by that definition, that's one of my favorite things about Squid Game and Midnight Mass. They ask questions that linger and stick with you. I'm going to have my opinions and my thoughts afterwards, whereas when you watch it, you're probably going to have completely different ones. And moving forward with different generations, whenever we share it with our friends or family, they're also going to watch it in a different light, and the story will evolve. The conversations afterwards will evolve, and that is living to me. That creates a story that is worth sharing over and over again, worth watching over and over again. When I inevitably rewatch Midnight Mass or Squid Game, I will probably see the same questions, hear the same discussions, and come out of them with different answers, with different opinions of my own, because I'm constantly changing. The only constant in life is change. So when a show sets a foundation, a stage upon which you can discuss ideas, it's going to forever be alive. I love when stories present philosophical questions that demand we dig deep to find honest answers. For example, in Squid Game, they ask questions such as, if you were drowning in debt, how far would you go to get out of it? What would you be willing to do to a complete stranger to survive a dangerous situation? How much physical abuse would you tolerate? For how much money? And if you suddenly had all the money in the world, what would you do? And do you think you'd be happy? Or Midnight Mass asking, what do you think happens after you die? It's an oldie, but it's a goodie, and it's incredibly well fleshed out in this show by these characters. However, it also made me question and also reflect on some of their answers and weigh them against my beliefs. Or when does belief cross a line and become radicalized? If you realize that all of your good intentions were misled, naive, and ultimately harmful to those following you, how would you move forward? For those who believe in the Bible or any other holy text, how would you respond to finding out that what you interpreted as hopeful is actually horror? These are only a handful of questions found in both of these shows. They both go far more in depth with far more questions, but they have me wanting to go back and watch them again, just so I can see how I will answer those questions a second time, a third time, and how I'll be able to discuss them with my friends that haven't seen them yet, just because they're alive. They're living things. They're going to grow as we do. So those are the three main reasons that I enjoyed Squid Game and Midnight Mass. There are many more. They're just great, entertaining shows, but those three aspects of the screenwriting specifically gobsmacked me. They were incredible, and as a writer myself, I was just floored and impressed by the masterclasses before me. So bravo to Hwang Dong-yuk for Squid Game, to Mike Flanagan for Midnight Mass. You both join my personal list with Taylor Sheridan and Bill DeBook as the top screenwriters working today. Both shows are lingerers, and I plan on rewatching both of them. But first, I just wanted to make this video so I could recommend them to anybody looking for a writer's perspective on what makes them so successful. So hopefully this video is at least a little helpful. All three of the components I discussed in this video are the ideals I strive for with my own books. So, if you've enjoyed this breakdown, please go down to the link below, click on it, and get your own copy of Leap of Fate before Light Switch comes out. These are books that are just chock full of what-if questions that I would love to discuss with more people. The plot is large and vast, but it is predicated on character growth and development. Lastly, if you yourself have watched either of these shows, let me know down below what your thoughts are, if you agree with my reasons for why they're good, or if you think that they are bad, and if you dislike them, why. And lastly, if you have watched any other shows or movies recently that have good writing with character over plot, that have quality, well fleshed out, and relatable villains, and that left you with questions that you're still working on dissecting in your own mind, please post them below so I can know other things to watch. I'm always looking for more shows and movies that fit those specific criteria. Thank you so much, and as always, may death not find you sleeping.